Welcome to my channel and thank you to my subscribers. In case you have not already subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. In this video, we are going to see how to add Azure AD as an OpenID Identity Provider in Cognito, Amazon Cognito. In the previous videos, we have seen how to add Azure AD as a SAML identity provider, as well as how to add Okta as a SAML identity provider, as well as Auth0 as a SAML identity provider in Cognito. So here we are going to use OpenID Connect protocol instead of the SAML protocol. And I'm going to use Chrome for all the configurations and Mozilla for testing. So before getting into the configuration screens, I will explain the end-to-end flow using this diagram. So if you look at this diagram, when the user tries to access the client application in step number 1, the client app will redirect to Cognito using OpenID Connect authorization code flow. And then Cognito will show a login screen with a button. And when the user clicks the button, it will redirect the user to Azure AD login page. And in the Azure AD login page, once the user enters the credentials and the validations are successful, Azure AD will return an authorization code back to Cognito. And then Cognito can use that authorization code in step number 8 and 9 to get the tokens, the ID and access tokens. And then using that access token, Cognito will call the user info endpoint in Azure AD to get the user details, which includes all the attributes, the basic attributes of a user, like name, first name, last name, email address. And then in step number 12, Cognito will either create a new profile or update the profile, depending on whether the profile already exists, and then return an authorization code back to the client app in step 13. And once that is done, the client app can use that authorization code to get the ID token and access token from Cognito. And then using those tokens, it can either allow or deny access to that user by checking the attributes in the token. So this is the end-to-end flow. And now let's get into the configuration screens. So I'm using the management console, AWS management console, for making all the Cognito related changes. And I have a Azure developer account. So this is a free developer account. You can always go to Microsoft Azure website and sign up for a developer account. And once you sign up, you can log into portal.azure.com and navigate to Azure Active Directory. But before doing the configuration in Azure Active Directory, let's go ahead and create a new Cognito user pool for this particular configuration. So once you go to the Cognito user pool, I already have multiple pools, but I'm going to create a new one for doing this end-to-end setup. So you can select username here, click next. You can leave the defaults, disable MFA. You can disable these options. The reason I'm disabling is I don't want to get into all these steps. You can always explore all those configurations at a later point of time. I'm not setting any required attributes for now, so click next and select send email with Cognito, click next. And let's select a user pool name, Azure AD Cognito test. Let me just copy it and select use Cognito hosted UI. Please don't forget this step because you need the Cognito hosted UI for this end-to-end configuration. And let's use the Cognito domain. So let me try this same thing. Or let me do one thing. I will name it as AAD Cognito 2. I think it should be available, but in case it's not available, it will throw an error when we go to the before going to the next step. So let me create a client, and we don't need a secret. And let's use the jwt.io website for testing. Let's check the advanced settings just to make sure everything is fine. Uh, yeah, it uses authorization code. Let's use implicit grant instead of authorization code. But please note that it is only for testing purpose and not for any production application. As you can see the warning here, it is not a secure grant type. So this is only for showing the demo. Please don't use this implicit grant for any of your production applications. Always use authorization code grant flow or the authorization code grant flow with Pixie, whichever works for you, but don't use implicit grant. And here, instead of OpenID phone email, let's use OpenID profile email, then click next. So I guess I got an error. Yeah, it says it's not a valid domain. Let's check something else. Azure Cognito 1, 2. Oh, this also doesn't work. Maybe let's use AD COG 1, 1. Yeah, this is available. So let's go to the next page and review all the settings and create the user pool. So the user pool got configured. So this is the one, and you can again review all the configurations here. You can see the client app that we created in this particular screen, which is the app integration screen. So now let's go to Azure AD and configure a OIDC client. So as I said, like once you navigate to this Azure Active Directory, you will see an option called app registrations. So here you can go ahead and create a new registration. And for this, let's name it as Cognito client demo. And you can leave this option as is, like, which means basically accounts in this organizational directory only. So users from this Azure Active Directory instance should be able to access this application. So you can leave it as is. And for the platform, select web. And for the redirect URI, let's actually go to the Cognito documentation. So if you go to this step number 1, so here you can see the details, like what is the redirect URI that needs to be configured in the identity provider. So this is the redirect URI. So you can copy this, go back to the Azure screen, paste it. We need to replace this user pool domain with the value that we configured during the user pool creation. So if you see here the Cognito domain, the AAD cog1 dot and the remaining value, the Cognito subdomain. So copy that and replace this with this one and register. So now we created a client application, OIDC client app in Azure AD for the Cognito instance, and let's configure the secret as well. So let's create a new secret and name it as version 1, v1, and 6 months should be fine. So we have the secret value here. Let's use it at a later point of time. So now we can go back to the Cognito screen and create a new identity provider. And this is a openidconnect identity provider. So select openidconnect here and give a name. I'm going to name it as AAD IDP. And we need to give the client ID. So let's get the client ID later. Let's first copy this secret. So copy this secret, put it in client secret. And for the client ID, go back to this overview. And here you can see the application client ID. Copy this, paste it here. And the authorized scopes, you can put OpenID profile email. And the attribute request method, you can select post. and here it says autofill the issuer URL. So in order to get the issuer URL, let's go to Azure AD documentation and type Azure, go to Google and type Azure AD OIDC well known, and you can click this very first link and search for well-known. So this is the well-known URL of Azure AD. Copy this and put it here, and we need to replace this tenant ID. Again, go back to the Azure AD screen, and here you can see directory tenant ID. Copy it and paste it here. So actually you can copy this, go to the browser and paste it, and then append that URL with well-known -openid configuration. You can see all the URLs. So these are all the endpoints for the Azure AD tenant that I own. Like whatever tenant you have will have a different tenant ID and different URLs, but this is the tenant that I have, I registered. So here we are done with this. Now let's map the attributes. So let's map the standard attributes like email, then family name. So the user pool attribute name is the Cognito user pool attribute name, and the openidconnect attribute is the attribute name that Azure sends. Generally, these are all standard attribute names, so both should match. So you can just give the same attribute name on both sides, and then name. So we are done with the identity provider configuration. Now the next step is, yeah, you can see the identity provider here. The next step is to add this identity provider to this client. So if you look at this screen, you can see currently this client supports only Cognito user pool identity provider, which means only users who are created in this Cognito user pool can access this application. Now I'm going to add one more IDP to it, which is the Azure AD IDP, which means both the users who exist in this Cognito user pool as well as the users who exist in the Azure AD can access this particular client. So now I have saved the changes. So the configuration part is done in both Cognito as well as Azure AD. The next step is to create a test user in Azure AD. So I'm going to do that. So go back to the directory, and then if you scroll up, you can go to users. I already have some test users, but anyway, I'm going to create a new one just for the purpose of the demo. So I will create a new user called Cognito AD test 1, and I will name it as AD test 1. And you can actually create your own password or you can set any password. So I am going to actually set my own password. And you can leave this account enabled as is. Go to next properties. So I'm going to give the first name as Cognito, last name as AD test 1, and for the email address, copy this and let's actually put Cognito AAD test 1 at you can give any email address. This is just for our testing purpose. Anyway, we are not going to verify this email, so you can give any email address. Click next, next, review and create. You can review all the details that you gave and click create. So I created the new user here. Sometimes it will not show up immediately, just refresh the page. Yeah, so the first user profile is the one that I created. It didn't show up immediately, so I just refreshed the page. Now we are done with the user configuration, we are done with the Cognito, the Azure AD, all the configurations. So now let's go ahead and test this end-to-end setup in Mozilla. So in order to test that, go back to Cognito screen, the app client configuration screen, and copy this URL. Right click, copy link address, and go to Mozilla, paste that address and enter. So now you can see the username password login form, which is basically the Cognito user credentials. So if you want to log into this application using a Cognito user credentials, you need to enter the username and password here. But now we are going to see how to log in using Azure AD user credentials. So I'm going to click this button. So I got this screen. So let's go back to that Azure AD user profile, copy this user principal name and paste it here and click next. And now we need to give the password. So for the very first time, it will ask you to set a new password. So the login was successful. And when you log in for the very first time to any application, Azure AD will ask you for the permission to share the details. So if you look at this permission screen, it will say, are you okay with allowing this app to see your basic profile details like name, username, first name, last name, email address? So if you are okay with this, you can accept. Otherwise, you can cancel and then talk to your administrator and say, I'm not comfortable in sharing. Then what are the other options? You can discuss all those things. So it depends entirely on what is your uh, what is your opinion, like whether you want to approve or not. So in this case, I'm just going to accept. And so now I'm logged in. And you can see the access token here. You can see the ID token details here, decoded in jwt.io. And you can verify all the details. So the family name is AAD test1. The email address is at example.com, the one which I gave. And then you can see the given name, which is Cognito. And you can see, yeah, that's it. I think the given name, the family name, and then the name and the email address. And now let's get back to the Cognito screen and see the user profile. So if you go to the users tab, you can see that user profile. And the prefix of that user profile is the identity provider name that we configured when we added that identity provider in Cognito. And this is some unique identifier that comes from Azure AD. But you can see all the details here. The family name is AAD test1. The name is Cognito AAD test1. The given name is Cognito. And the email address is Cognito AAD test1 at example.com, which exactly matches with what we configured here for this user profile. So you can compare and see. So you can also go and check this applications here in the Azure AD user profile, and then you will see this Cognito client demo application that we configured in Azure AD. Since I logged into this application and since I gave permission to this application to access my profile, you can see the list of apps for which I have already provided permissions here. And you can see, like for example, if you are trying to log into some other application, then you provide access to your profile to that application as well. It will show up all those applications here. So this is how you do the end-to-end configuration for adding Azure AD as an OpenID provider in Cognito. There are lots of steps involved, so I'm sure you will face some issues. But if you face any issues and you are not able to resolve it, please feel free to post your questions in the comment section and I will be happy to respond. I hope you enjoyed this video, and again, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.